Well, and hello, everyone. This is Michael Hinkson, your host for Unstoppable Mindset. We're glad you're with us today and really glad to have the opportunity once again to be with you and talk about all different kinds of things as we do every week. That's why we call it an Unstoppable Mindset, where inclusion, diversity, and the unexpected meet, because unexpected is much more fun, keeps us all on our toes. Our guest today is Daniel, and I would like to welcome you to Unstoppable Mindset, and we really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, it's good to be here. Happy to participate, and really, I'm honored by the fact that you invited me to be here. So, thank you for that.
Well, we made it. It's been fun, and we got introduced through Noah,
hmm
who I guess does publicity for you.
Um, he and I have talked about that at some point. I'm trying to remember the entire chain that got me to you. The person introduced me to him, to her, to him, to her, to him, to her, to you. Right? I need a family tree of an introductory tree on my wall over here, just to keep up with all the connections.
Yeah.
But, yeah.
It keeps you alert and keeps you alert, you know?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, I really am glad that you're here. And Daniel has I think, a great story to tell. He lives in Columbia, South Carolina, which he's really mostly called home, although he was born elsewhere, but sort of since roughly a fairly short time, he moved to Columbia and has been there. So I won't go into all those details. We don't need to worry about them unless he wants to tell them. But Columbia's been home most all of his life. He did live a little while away from Columbia, and on that I'm sure we're going to talk about. But nevertheless, Columbia is home. I've been to Columbia and enjoy it. And I miss South Carolina sausage biscuits, so I don't know what to say. But nevertheless, one of these days, I'm sure I'll get back down there and the people I know will make some more. But meanwhile, here we are. So why don't you start by telling us a little bit about kind of the early Daniel growing up and, all that, just to give people a little flavor for you.
Sure. Older brother, 2 years older than me, exactly. I mean, within a couple of days of 2 years. We're the only two, no other siblings. Dad was an Air Force fighter pilot. And people think that must be pretty cool. And at some level it is. But to help frame it better and give you a better detail of the experience of being the son of a fighter pilot, I encourage people that I talk to remember the movie Top Gun, not the second one where everybody was a good guy. They were older and more mature, and but in the first one where there was the good guy that was a jerk and the bad guy that was a jerk, but they were both jerks. And it's a weird environment to grow up in when the biggest compliment one man can pay another is "you don't suck that bad," right? That's literally the biggest compliment they're allowed to pay each other. So I grew up always thinking like I was coming up short, which has got some positive and some negative attributes. My clients love it because I tend to over deliver for what I charge them. It kills my coach because he thinks I'm not fairly pricing myself in the marketplace. But it made me want to be an entrepreneur because the benchmarks are clear, right? In a sales environment, whether you're ahead or behind, what you got to do to catch the number one guy or gal. If you're trying to beat the competition, how big your paycheck's going to be if you're working on, commission or base plus commission. And I really enjoyed the environment of being, I don't want to say competitive, but knowing that, I was competing with myself. So many of my friends are employed by academia or small companies or big corporations. And even when they benchmark really good results, the pay, the compensation, the time off, the rewards, the advancements aren't necessarily there. So I really like the idea of having a very specific set of objectives. If I do this, then that happens. If I work this hard, I get this much money. If I achieve these results, I get moved up into more authority and more responsibility. And that really made a world of difference for me. So that has a lot to do with it. And as a result of that, I've opted for the self-employment route.
It certainly gives you lots of life experiences, doesn't it?
It does. And I think that people that work for other people certainly learn a lot as well, meaning I've not had to have extended coworker relationships or manage those over time. My first wife was fond of saying that Daniel's good in small doses, right?
So here we are. And so you're telling us a little bit about you and growing up.
Sure. And just, father is fighter pilot, right? And always pushing me to do more, be more. And that led me to choose a route of self-employment, usually in the early parts of my career, independent contractor for other people. So I still had a structure to work in, but I knew what my objectives were. I knew how much money I would earn if I produced X result. I knew what it meant to get more responsibility. And that worked well for me. And then about 8 years ago now, I decided to become a full-fledged entrepreneur and really do my own thing and create some fun stuff. And it's been a fun ride in that regard. But I do love the freedom that comes from setting my own objectives on a daily basis.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for that. And not everyone can do that because it does take a lot of discipline to be an entrepreneur, to do the things that you need to do and know that you need to be structured to do the things that have to be done. At the same time, you do need to be able to take time off when that becomes relevant. But still, it does take a lot of discipline to be an entrepreneur and make it work successfully.
It, right. And I don't know that I've mastered the discipline for it, but at least I'm working on my objectives and not somebody else's. Right? The only person I'm letting down is me, when I miss a deadline or don't execute. So that feels better to me than having the weight of somebody else's expectations on me.
Counts for something, doesn't it?
I think so.
Well, so you grew up in Columbia, but then you went off to college. Where'd you go to college?
Down in Atlanta, Georgia, small school there, but I had a choice of three places, and each of them had offered me scholarship funds that equaled the same cost to me, i.e., the packages were different, but the net cost to me in each case was going to be about the same. So rather than pick based on the financial aid or the scholarships that are being offered, I picked on which city it was in. And I figured being a college kid in Atlanta, Georgia was a good move. And it turned out it was a good move. There was lots to see and do in Atlanta, Georgia, only about 4 hours from home. And it worked out to be pretty good. My other choices were Athens, Georgia, which is strictly a college town. And when the summer rolls around, the place is empty. It's ghost town. And the other was a school in Farmville, Virginia. Excuse me. The closest town is Farmville, Virginia, where the 7-Eleven closed at 6. And I'm not exaggerating when I say that.
Wow.
I'm like, yeah, not too sure I want to be that far out in the sticks, right? As a 19-year-old away from home for the first time, I wanted to have something to do with my freedom. Meaning, if I was free to do what I wanted to do, I wanted to have something to do with that. So, and not sit around Farmville, Virginia, wonder what was going to happen next.
Yeah. Well, so what did you major in college?
That question always comes up, and I'm always hesitant to answer that because people think it has something to do with what I do today, and it does not in any way, shape, or stretch. I got a BS in psychology, which I tell people was heavy on the BS and light on the psychology. But
at the same time, and so my master's degree is in physics, although I ended up not going into physics, although I did a little bit of science work. But would you say though that even though you got a BS in psychology and you went off and you're clearly doing other things, did you learn stuff or did that degree benefit you? And do you still have skills and things that you learned from that you use today?
I used to tell people that I had 3 facts that I used in college, that I learned in college, that I used on a daily basis. And for the longest time, I could recite all 3, but nobody asked me what they were for the longest time. And I'm sure I still use all 3 of them, but I can only recall one. So the answer is, for the most part, no. Mm-hmm. But I think I went to college for a piece of paper. Someone else was paying for it. In this case, the school, not my parents. It was a scholarship. And I went to school not to learn anything. I went to school to get a piece of paper. I started off as a physics major, by the way. And when I got to the semester where they were trying to teach me that light is both a particle and a wave, I'm like, yeah, we're going to need a different major because I could not get my head around that at all. And the degree that was had the least hurdles to get to switch majors and finish at that moment in time was psychology. So that's the route I took. But I was just there for the piece of paper.
Physics wasn't what you wanted to do, huh?
I did, but if the textbook had said light has attributes of both a particle and a wave. I might have been able to grasp it a little bit quicker, but it said light is both a particle and a wave. And it was the week of finals, and I was struggling with the intro and chapter 1 for the textbook. And I'm like, yep, might be time for a different major at this point. So,
my master's is in physics, and
you mentioned,
and I enjoyed it, and I still have memories and concepts that I learned that I use today. Probably the biggest one is paying attention to detail. In physics, it isn't enough to get the numeric right answer. You got to make the units work as well, which is more of a detail issue than just getting the numbers, because you can use a calculator and get numbers, but that doesn't get you the units. And so I found that skill to be extremely important and valuable as I worked through physics and went through, and I actually got a master's and also a secondary teaching credential. And I thought I was going to teach, but life did take different directions. And so that's okay.
Well, when you frame it that way, I will say that there is something that I learned that I use, maybe not in my work, but in my field of vision. And that's this, lab and experimental methods taught me to ask the question, how did they ask the questions, right? Mm-hmm. What was the structure of the test, the experiment, the data collection, right? Because you can do an awful lot of things. For example, they have found that if a doctor says to a patient, we have a chance to do surgery, there's a 10% chance of success, meaning that you'll live, they get a better uptake than if they say there's a 90% chance that you'll die.
Yeah.
It's the same information, but you always have to look at the way the questions are framed. Polls are notorious for this, right? Data collection, from my days in Cutco, I read a study, and I put quotes around it, right? A study that said that wooden cutting boards retain less bacteria than plastic cutting boards or polypropylene polyurethane, which is clearly blatantly wrong if you're treating your cutting boards correctly. And I looked into it, and they simply wiped the surface and then waited a day and measured bacteria count. Well, if you don't put you can dishwasher a plastic cutting board and sterilize it, right? Why would you simply wipe the surface? In the case of the wood, the bacteria was no longer at the surface. It had sunk into the wood. So there's not as much on the surface. I'm like, oh, but it's still there. It's just down in the wood. You have to literally look at the way these tests are done. And I guess the wooden cutting board industry paid for that study, because I can't imagine anybody else that would A, care, and B, make the argument that a wooden cutting board was better than a plastic one for sanitation reasons, because it's clearly not.
It's all sales. And of course, that brings up the fact that you get that kind of knowledge, honestly, because when you were a sophomore, you got a summer job with Cutco.
I did. Yeah. And I remember 36 years ago now, having to explain what Cutco was, but Cutco's been around for so long in America that most American households have at least some Cutco in them at this point. So I find most people already know and understand, but it was a direct sales job. It was not structured the way an MLM or a network marketing company is, but my job was to literally take a kit full of samples, right? Some regular, normal, standard products that we would use and sell, and take them into people's homes and sit at the kitchen table and demonstrate the usefulness, go over the guarantee, go over the pricing options, and what choices they could pick stuff out. And it turned out to be a lot of fun. Turned out to be more lucrative than most people imagine. I don't want to brag too much about how much reps make doing that, because then customers get upset we're being overpaid. But that's not true either. But it was a blast to do that, and the learning environment, right? What I learned about setting my own goals, discipline, awareness of the way communication landed on other people. I don't. The psychology of communication, being around people, helping them understand what I knew to be true, finding ways to address concerns, issues, objections without making them feel wrong or awkward. It was a good environment, and that's why I stayed for 15 years.
For me, after college, I went to work with an organization that had developed a relationship with Dr. Ray Kurzweil, the futurist, and who now talks a lot about the singularity. And at that time, he had developed a machine that would read print out loud. Well, it would read print, and he chose for the first application of that machine to be a machine that would read print out loud so the blind people could read printed books, because his technology didn't care about what type styles or print fonts were on the page. Anyway,
Hmm.
after the job was over, I went to work for Ray, and after about 8 or 9 months, I was confronted with a situation where I was called into the office of the VP of marketing, who said, your work is great. We love what you do, but you're not doing anything that produces revenue for us, because I was doing human factors work, helping
Hmm.
to enhance the machine. And so we're going to have to lay you off, he said. And I said, lay me off. And he said, again, your work is great, but we don't have enough revenue producers. We're like a lot of startup
Hmm.
engineering companies. We've hired way too many non-revenue producers. So we got to let people go. And that includes you, unless you'll go into sales. And not only go into sales, but not selling the reading machine for the blind, but there's a commercial version that had just come out. So I ended up doing that, and took a Dale Carnegie sales course, a 10-week course, which I enjoyed very much, learned a lot,
Sure.
and have been selling professionally ever since. Of course, um, my story of being in the World Trade Center and escaping on September 11th, after that, I still continued to sell. What I tell people is I love to view my life as now selling life and philosophy rather than selling computer hardware and managing a hardware team. But
Sure.
it really is about selling life and philosophy and getting people to understand you can learn to control fear. You can learn to function in environments that you don't expect, and you can go out of your comfort zone. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely.
So it's been a lot of fun for the last 23 years to do that.
Okay, now you got me curious. What's the commercial application of a machine that will take a printed book and read it out loud? What I can clearly see why people with various and sundry, uh,
Well,
you
for
know,
people who are blind and low vision, well, so let's deal with
right,
it. The commercial application for that particular machine is that people will buy it and use it. Of course, today it's an app on a smartphone, so it's a whole lot different than it was as a
right,
$50,000 machine back in 1978 and 1979. But the idea
right.
behind the machine was that libraries or agencies or organizations could purchase them, have them centrally located, so people who never could read print out loud before could actually go get a book, put it on the machine, and read it.
Okay, so
And
this makes sense. Libraries and institutions of public knowledge. Okay,
but
because
then
I
the
could see where someone would want one in their home if they had need of it, but I was just curious about the commercial application.
but then over time, as the technology advanced, as more were produced, the price went down, and it went from $50,000 down to $20,000, and you started to see some in people's homes.
Hmm.
And then, of course, it got less and less and less, and eventually, before it became almost a free app on a smartphone today,
Hmm.
it used the Symbian operating system in Nokia phones, and the technology in total was about $1,800. And then, of course, it became an app on a smartphone, and a lot of
Hmm.
OCR today is free. But the other side of it was the machine I sold was a version that banks would use, lawyers would use, other people would use to be able to take printed documents and get them into computer readable form, because people saw pretty early on that was an important thing to be able to do so
Got
that
it.
they could peruse databases and so on. And so the
Correct.
bottom line is that it was very relevant to do. And so there was commercial value, but
I
now
see.
OCR has gotten to be such a regular mainstay of society. We think of it differently than we did then.
Very much so. And
But
yet we still
still,
have one that can read my handwriting.
that is coming.
No, my
There's
handwriting.
I wanted to be a doctor, and I passed the handwriting course, but
There you
that's as
go.
far as I
Me
got.
too.
But and as I love to tell people, the problem was I didn't have any patience, but oh boy. But the bottom line is that there were applications for it, and it worked, and it was great technology. So it taught me a lot to be able to be involved in taking the Dale Carnegie sales course. And I know he's one of the people that influenced you in various ways.
Yeah, very
But it's
much so.
very important to recognize, for me, that good salespeople are really teachers and advisors and counselors. Um,
Absolutely.
you can you can probably talk people into buying stuff, which may or may not be a good thing to do. But if you've really got something that they need, they'll figure it out and they'll want to buy it.
Yeah, the way it was summarized to me, and this particularly relates around, the Cutco product or another tangible. Selling is just a transference of enthusiasm. Meaning, if
Right.
if they knew and understood it the way I did, it would make perfect sense. So the question was, how do I find a way to convey my enthusiasm for what I knew about the product in as simple, I don't want to say simple, that sounds condescending, in as few words as possible in ways that made it easy for them to digest, right? Because some people are tactile and they want to hold it and look at it. Others are, knowledge oriented and they want to read the testimonials and the guarantee and, things like that. So just how do you kind of figure out who's looking for what?
Yeah. And the reality is everybody is a little bit different in that arena. And as you said, conveying enthusiasm, you'll either be able to do it or you'll find that what you have isn't really what's going to make them enthusiastic, which can be okay
Right.
too.
Yep.
The important thing is to know that and to use that information. And when necessary, you move on and you don't worry about it.
Correct.
We have Cutco knives. We're happy. But
Good.
anyway, I think the issue is that we all have to grow and we all have to learn to do those things that we find are relevant. And if we put our minds to it, we can be very productive people. And as you pointed out, it's all about transmitting enthusiasm, and that's the way it really ought to be.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so.
So you talk about, well, so let's go back. So you went to work for Cutco and you did that for 15 years.
Mm-hmm.
What would you say the most important thing you learned as a salesperson in working at Cutco really came down to?
There's so many fundamental lessons in the direct sales industry, right? It's why, so many people got their start with Encyclopedia Britannica or Southwestern Books or Cutco knives, right? I mean, in the 90s, Cintas, the uniform people, and Sprint, when cell phones were new and actually had to actively be sold because people had to be talked into it.
Yeah.
They ran whole recruiting ads that said, "Did you used to sell knives? Entry level work, starting at base, salary plus commission," right? Because it was so foundational. So it's hard to say the most important thing, but I would say the ability to take control of my own schedule and therefore my own actions, right, was a huge part of it. But then the ability to really know and understand the people that I was working with as customers, as my time at Cutco matured, and even after I left working with them full time, I still had a database of customers that wanted to deal strictly with me, and the fact that they were happy to see me, right? That when I was, even after I'd moved away, if I came back to town, that my customers would be like, "Oh, I heard you're in town. Will you come to our house and have dinner?" Right? And just the way I was able to move from business relationship into one where I really connected with them. And, that many years seeing that many customers gave me some really cool stories too, which I'm not going to, eat up most of this out, but I've just got some fun stories of the way people responded to my pleasant persistence, follow through, follow up, knowing that I could run into any one of them anywhere at any moment in time and not feel that I had oversold them or I had been pushy, right? That they would be happy in what they bought. And as a matter of fact, I've only ever had one customer tell me that they bought too much Cutco. And she said that to me when I was there sharpening her Cutco and selling her more. And she said she had bought more than she needed for her kitchen initially. I was selling her more for a gift, let me be clear. And I paused and I said, "Do you remember how this is like 5 or 6 years later. I said, "Do you remember how the conversation went?" Because I use the story of that demo when I'm talking to other people and to other reps. She said, "Oh yeah, no." She goes, "I will 100% own that I chose to buy more than I needed." She goes, "I was not trying to pin that on you. I was just trying to tell you that that's what I did." I said, "Oh, okay." Because I wanted to be clear. I remember very clearly that I offered you the small set and you chose the big set. And she
Yeah.
goes, "That is exactly what happened. I made the choice to overbuy, and that's on me." And that level of confidence of knowing I could go through time and space, that I could meet my customers here when I came back to town, or now that I moved back to town, and I don't have to flinch, right? That I did it in a way that left them and me feeling good about the way I sold them. So
Right.
that's pretty important.
And it is important, and it's vital to do that. You know, a lot of people in sales talk all about networking and so on. You don't. You really do talk about what I believe is the most important part about sales, and that's relationship building.
Correct. Uh, I took my theme from the subtitle of a book called Super Connector, and the subtitle is "Stop Networking and Start Building Relationships That Matter." And I'm comfortable using that. By the way, there's another book titled "Networking Isn't Working," and it's really hitting the same theme, which is whatever people are calling networking is not really truly building a network and relationships that make a difference. It's social selling. I call it, sometimes it's being practiced as speed prospecting, right? Or marketing by hand. There's a bunch of ways that I can articulate why it's not literally not networking. It's simply meeting people and treating them very one-dimensionally. Will you buy my thing, or do you know somebody that'll buy my thing? Right. And those are very short-sighted questions that have limited value, and keeps people on a treadmill of thinking they need to do more networking or meet the right people. I get this all the time. If I can just find the right people, or if I can just be in the right rooms, right, at the right events. And I'm like, or you could just be the person that knows how to build the right relationships no matter what room you're in. Now, having said that, are there some events, some rooms, some communities that have a higher likelihood of high value? Sure. I don't want to discourage people from being intentional about where they go, but that's only probably 10 to 20% of the equation. 80 to 90% of the equation is, do you know what to do with the people that you meet when you meet them? Because anybody that's the wrong person, and I simply mean that in the context of they're not a prospect, knows people that could be a prospect. But you can't just go, oh, you're not going to buy my thing, Michael Hinkson? Do you know anybody that's going to buy my thing? That's no good, because you're not going to put your reputation on the line and refer me somewhere, right, until you have some trust in me, whatever that looks like.
And that's the real issue, right? It's all about trust right down the line. Network is meeting more people. That's great. I love to meet people, but I personally like to establish relationships. I like to get to know people, and have probably longer and more conversations than some of my bosses would have liked. But the result and the success of establishing the relationships can't be ignored.
Correct. And I think that you kind of threw in a word there that I think some people will internalize, or it will reinforce some of their preconceptions. And I think it's worth at least addressing. And I'll just give you a quick example. 4 weeks ago, I had a conversation with somebody I was introduced to. His name happens to be Michael as well, Mike Whitmore. He was impressed with the quality of our first, well, it went 45. It was scheduled for 25, and it went 45 because we really gelled. And he invited me to come to a cocktail party that was being hosted by a company he was affiliated with, 3-hour event. And we spoke again later to make sure, everything was in order, because it involved me flying to Salt Lake City for a cocktail party. I did. He was there. We spoke briefly. We both mingled with other people. I had breakfast with him the next day. This is yesterday that I had breakfast with him. And as we're talking, he's like, okay, I have 80 people that need what you've got. He's basically, after a few conversations, going to refer about $400,000 worth of business to me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And I'm like, okay. And so what people miss is that you can build that relationship quickly if you're intentional about building the relationship. And where I see the mistake most people make, and God bless Dale Carnegie and Dale's Carnegie sales training course, right? But the model, what I call the cocktail party model, or the how to win friends and influence people model of getting to know somebody. How about that ball team? Did your sports club win, right? How's the weather up there? Did you hear about how's your mom, right? When's the last time you were camping with the fam? All legitimate questions, but none of them move the business conversation forward. And so the ability to build a productive business relationship faster by focusing on the mutual shared value that you have between each other and the business aspects, and including the personal as the icing on the cake, is a much better way to do it. And that's why I was very particular about the fact that, when I was talking about my experience with Cutco, that it was over time that the personal aspects, that the friendship looking aspects evolved on top of the business relationship, because it is way easier to mix the ingredients to put the icing of friendship on the cake of business than it is to establish a friendship and then go, by the way, it's time for us to talk business, right? You need to be my client, or you need to let me sell what I'm offering. That can become jarring to people, and it can call into question the whole reason you got to know them to start with, right? So I much prefer the other route. And just one other brief example, speaking with a woman in what a first paired interview, a quick connect, 25 minutes long. And she's like, I understand, relationships, it's the way to do it, right? It's the long play, but it pays off over time. And, as long as you stay at it and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, why do you keep saying it's the long play? Well, because relationships take time and da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, if you say so. And we started to run long and realized we had more value. So we booked it. It ended up being about 4 or 5 weeks later, because my calendar stays pretty full. And so we've been in one 25-minute phone call. We start the second Zoom with Peggy asking me, who's your target market again? And I gave her the description for a $25,000 client. And she said, I have 3 people that I can refer you to in that space that might want to be clients. And then she started to try and tell me how relationships are the long play again. I'm like, Peggy, hold up. We spent 25 minutes together a month ago, and you started this conversation by referring $75,000 worth of revenue to me. What makes you think relationships are the long play? I think you can make them last if you want them to last, but it doesn't take a long time to build those. I said, I knew what I was doing with those first 25 minutes. That's why at this stage of the game, you're looking to refer business to me.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so I don't think it's you're not establishing a marriage relationship, right? You're not deciding who your new best friend is going to be, right? You're trying to establish a mutually beneficial business relationship and see where it takes you. Right. And with the right set of questions, it goes so much faster.
And that's really a key. And for me, one of the things that I learned in sales that I really value a lot is never answer or ask closed-ended questions. I hate yes and no questions, because I learned a long time ago, I don't learn much if I just ask somebody, oh, so you tell me you need a tape library, right? Yes. And you ask other questions, but you don't ask the questions like, what do you want to use it for? Why do you really need a tape library today? What is it that you value or that you want to see increased in your world, or whatever the case happens to be?
Right.
But I hate closed-ended questions. I love to engage in conversations, and I have lots of stories where my sales teams, when I manage teams, at first didn't understand that. And they asked the wrong questions. But when I would ask questions, I would get people talking. And I went to a room of Solomon Brothers one day back in like 2000 or so, or early 2001. And I was with my best sales guy who understood a lot of this, but at the same time, he wanted me to come along because they wanted to meet a sales manager. And he said, I didn't tell him you were blind, because we're going to really hit him with that. And that was fine. I understood what he meant, but also he knew that my style was different and that I liked to get more information. And so when we went in and I started trying to talk to the people, I turned to one guy and I said, tell me, what's your name? And it took me 3 times to get him to say his name. And finally I had to say, I heard you as I walked by, I know you're there. What's your name? And then we started talking. And by the time all was said and done, I got everyone in that room talking, which is great because they understood that I was really interested in knowing what they were all about, which is important.
Correct. And I mean, part of it, right, particularly if you're problem solving, right? If you're there with a solution, a sales environment, open-ended questions, predominantly the way to go. There's always going to have to be some closed-ended,
Yeah.
right? What's the budget for this? Who are the decision makers in the process? And I certainly think a lot of the same ones apply in decision making, meaning it's probably an 80-20 split. 80% of the questions should be open-ended. 20%, you just need some data from the other person, right? Because as I'm meeting people, I need to decide who to refer them to, right? I know I can think off the top of my head of 3 different resume coaches, right? People that help people get their resume, their cover letter, and their interview skills together. And one charges, 4,000 to 5,000 for the effort, right? Depending on the package, right? One charges between 2,000 and 3,500, depending on what you want. And one guy charges, his deluxe is $1,200. Right. And the deliverable is roughly the same, meaning I've never looked for a job using these people because I've been self-employed forever. But I would imagine the deliverable is probably not 3 times as or 4 times as good at 5K at 1,200. Right.
Right.
But I need to know the answer of what you charge because the rooms I will put people in are going to differentiate. Right. I actually said to the guy that was charging 1,200, I said, "Where'd you get the number?" And he told me, and I said, "Do you realize that you're losing business because you're not charging enough?"
Right.
And he said, "Yes, some prospects have told me that." And I said, "I'm sorry, plural?" I said,
Hello?
how many are going to tell you before you raise your rates? And I said, "Here's the thing. There's communities, networks that I can introduce you to at that price point, but the networks that I run in won't take you seriously if you're not quoting 5,000 for the job."
Yeah.
And he just couldn't get his head around it. And I'm like, okay, well, then you're stuck there until you figure out that you need to triple or quadruple your price to hang out in the rooms I hang out in, to be taken seriously.
Yeah. And it is tough for a lot of people. By the way, with that Solomon story, by the time I was done, and we had planned on doing a PowerPoint show describing our products, which I did, but even before we did that, I knew our product wasn't going to do what they needed. But we went through the presentation, and then I said, and as you can see, what we have won't work. Here's why, but here's what will work. And after it was all said and done, one of the people from near the back of the room came up and he said, "We're mad at you." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "Oh, your presentation was great. You gave us an interesting presentation. We didn't get bored at all. The problem was we forgot you were blind and we didn't dare fall asleep because you'd see us." And I said, well, the bottom line is my dog was down here taking notes and we would have got you anyway. But we had a lot of fun with that. 2 weeks later, though, we got a proposal request from them. They said, "Just tell us what we're going to have to pay. We got another project and we're going to do it with you." And that was it.
Yeah. And because of the credibility that you established.
The credibility
it's a beautiful thing.
And it is a great thing.
That was part of the discussion I had with some of my clients today when I hold a weekly office hours to see what comes up. And I said, it's just important to be able to refer people to resources or vendors as it is to refer them to a prospect, right? If you don't have the solution, or if your solution isn't the best fit for them, the level of credibility you gain to go, you know what you need to do? You need to go hang out over there.
Yeah.
Right. You need to talk to that guy or gal about what they have to offer.
Yeah.
And the credibility goes through the roof.
Well, we've been talking about networking, and I think that's it. Everything we've talked about, I think, really makes a lot of sense. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that you don't build a network. It's just that networking and building a network are really 2 different sorts of things. What are some of the most important things that you've learned about building networks?
Sure. There's several, and some of them come as a bit of a shock to people. And I always say it's okay if it's a shock to you because it was a shock to me. But I don't have opinions. I have positions based on data, right? You know that from your days as a scientist. What you think ought to be true, absolutely irrelevant in the face of what the data tells us is true. But I think one of the important things is that it's possible to give wrong. Adam Grant says in the first chapter of his book, Give and Take, that if you look at people's networking styles, and I'll use the common vernacular, networking styles, you have givers, people that tend to give more than they receive, takers, people whose objective is to always be on the plus side of the equation, and then matchers, people that practice a degree of reciprocity. And I would even argue that reciprocity and matching is a bad mentality, just so you know. Yeah. But if you look at the lifetime of success, a career's worth of success, in the top levels of success, you find more givers than takers and matchers, which makes a
Yeah.
lot of sense. In the lowest levels of success, you find more givers than takers and matchers. They're
Yeah.
giving wrong. They tend to polarize. They tend to either be high achieving or very low achieving because they're giving wrong. And so, Michael, let me use his name. We had breakfast yesterday morning after the happy hour. And I said, Mike, are you open for coaching? And he said, I am. He said, I didn't have you fly out here to Salt Lake City because I don't respect you. What do you got for me? I said, Josh kept thanking you yesterday for the things you've done for him in his world lately, over the last several years. And he kept saying, what can I do for you? And you said, oh, no, I just love giving. I love giving, right? It's not a problem. I'm in a great position. I don't have a lot of need of resources. And I said, and you were missing the fact that he was explicitly telling you this relationship feels uneven. I said, it takes longer to kill it, but you will kill a relationship just as quickly by consistently overgiving as you will by taking too much. And it's a little more subconscious, although in Josh's case, it was very conscious. He was actively trying to get Mike to tell him, what can I do for you so I don't feel like I'm powerless in this relationship? And Mike was like, oh my gosh, I never thought of that. I said, look, I said, I don't know how old your kids are. He said, well, 2 of them are married. And I said, my grown daughter argues with me over who's going to buy dinner. But I get it because I used to argue with my dad who was going to buy dinner, dinner together, right? It feels weird for someone, even somebody that loves you, right? And of course, the only way I can do it with my daughter is to explain it's her money anyway. I'm just spending her inheritance on her now. And it's the only way she'll let me buy dinner every time we meet. And she still insists that she pays the tip because overgiving will get in the way of what we're trying to accomplish, right?
And that's
he's
fair.
Like, yeah. And so people miss that, right? I get this law of reciprocity. If I just give and give and give to the world, it'll all come back to me. No, ma'am. We have 6,000 years of recorded history that says, that's not how it works.
There's something to be said for giving, but there's also receiving. And in a sense, receiving can be a gift too. So you're mentioning Michael and Josh. Josh would have loved, as you're pointing out, Michael to tell him some things that he could do for Michael. And that would have been a great gift. So the reality is it's how people view giving, which is oftentimes such a problem. I know for me as a public speaker, I love dealing with organizations that are willing to pay a decent wage to bring a speaker in because they understand it and they know they're going to get their money's worth out of it. And I've gone and spoken at some places where they say, well, we can't pay you a lot of money. We're going to have to pay just this little tiny amount. And invariably, they're the organizations that take the most work because they're the ones that are demanding the most, even though they're not giving nearly as much in return. And for me, I will always tell anyone, especially when we're clearly establishing a good relationship, I'm here as your guest. I want to do whatever you need me to do. So please tell me how best I can help you. But I know I'm going to add value and we explore that together. And it's all about communication.
I think so. Well, and in the case, just going back to the Mike and Josh story real quick, right? There's number one, there's a sense of fairness. And I don't like the word reciprocity or matching.
Right.
I like the word mutuality, but there's a sense of fairness, number one. Number two, it's a little bit belittling to Josh for Mike to act like Josh doesn't have anything to offer him, right? It's a little bit condescending, or it could be. Mike doesn't mean it that way, right?
No.
What he means is my relationship with you, Josh, is not predicated on us keeping a scoreboard on the wall and that we make sure we come out even at the end of every quarter, right? But and then the third part is, I said, Mike, think of how good you feel when you give. He says, I love it. It's great. That's why I said, so you're robbing Josh of the feeling of giving when you don't give him a chance to give. I said, you're telling him that your joy is more important than his joy. And he's like, I never thought of overgiving or not asking as robbing people of joy. I said, you need to give the gift to Josh and the people around you to feel the joy that comes from being of use, of being helpful, of having, and I said, even if you have to make something up or overstate the value of a task that he could do for you. I said, if you literally don't need anything in your world, Mike, find some job hunter that's looking for work and say, Josh, as a courtesy to me, would you meet with Billy Bob and see if you can help him find work? Somehow give Josh the sense that he's contributing to the betterment of your world,
even
well.
if it may not work out that this person, Billy Bob, would get a job, but it's still you're helping to further the relationship between the two of you.
Correct. Right. You're helping him feel like he's an equal in that relationship, and that's an important part of it. It really is.
It's absolutely an important part.
I do believe we absolutely should tithe. We should give of our time. We should be at the homeless shelter on Thanksgiving if that's what we're called to do. We should be, aid to the poor, mentoring junior people who don't have a lot to offer us. I absolutely believe that's true. So when I say give strategically or give in a sense of mutuality, but we need clear delineations on, what we're doing, because if we give indiscriminately, then we find out that we're like the people in chapter 1 of Adam Grant's book that are in the lower quartile of success, even though we're, quote, doing all the right things. And the best way to make, the example I give on that, and I'll articulate this a little bit. I'm holding my hands apart and moving them closer together in stages, just because the visual will help you here too. But I tell people, right, I hold my hands apart and I say, we're going to spend this much time on the planet alive, right? And this much time on the planet awake, right? And this much time on the planet at work. And then I'll pause and go, these are approximations, right? Because clearly they are.
Right.
And this much time on the planet dealing with other people. So if it's true that we only have a limited or finite resource of time to spend building a network with other people, then why wouldn't we choose people whose message is worth amplifying and who we're well positioned to amplify, and vice versa? And to make that even more clear for people, if you're a real estate agent, you could find a lot of people that would refer business to you, but you could find a few people that would refer a lot of business
to you. Yeah.
You could find a mortgage lender, a divorce attorney, a moving company, a funeral home director, a nursing home director, right? And if you're going to spend time building relationships with people, why wouldn't you find the people who are positioned to touch more people that you need to touch, particularly if there is some mutuality? Meaning, as a real estate agent, I would be just as likely to be able to help a mortgage lender, a moving company, a funeral home director, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Right? All of those things can come into play. And, John Gates, the salary negotiation coach, right? And Amanda Valbert, the resume writing coach. Anybody can refer business to Amanda, but John's going to refer a lot more business to Amanda. Anybody can refer business to John, but Amanda's going to refer a lot more business to John. And given that we've only got a finite number of conversations we're able to hold in our lifetime, why wouldn't Amanda and John be spending time with each other rather than spending time with me, who might occasionally meet somebody who needs them, but not on a daily basis, the way Amanda meets John's clients and John meets Amanda's potential clients.
So here's the other way to spin may not be the right word, but I'll use it.
Frame it.
Frame it. So you've got somebody who you're not giving a lot of, let's say a real estate agent, you're not giving that person a lot, but you're giving Elmo Schwartz, the real estate agent down the street, a lot more referrals and so on. Then the real estate agent who you're not referring a lot of people to comes along and says, I know you're really working with this other guy, but you and I have had some conversations and so on. How come I can't take advantage of the many opportunities that you're offering? And for me, I always rejoice when I hear somebody ask that question, because at least they're opening up and they're saying, what do I need to do? At least that's what I assume they're asking.
Yes. Yeah. And that's a question that I teach people to ask. Under what conditions would you feel comfortable referring business to me?
Right.
Right. And, they may go, well, we don't share the same last name, but all my referrals go to, Billy Bob, because he's my brother-in-law, and Thanksgiving gets weird, right? If he realizes I've been giving leads to you, right? It may never happen. Now, in my case, I believe in having multiple referral partners in every industry, right?
Yeah,
I don't just pick one because personality plays part of it,
sure
right?
it
I
does.
mean, and we can go back to real estate. Just because you say you're a real estate agent, I'm a real estate agent, doesn't mean we're calling on the same market at all,
Right,
right? You could be a buyer's agent and I could be a seller's agent. You could be
right,
calling on, what's a probate and estate issues. I could be dealing with first-time home buyers and young people, right?
right.
And therefore, and a lot of times it's personality, meaning I personally is not the right word, approach to business.
Right.
Meaning there's some people that I would send to Ann Thomason, and there's some people I would send to Kim Lawson, and there's some people I would send to Elaine Gillespie, and some people I would send to Takoya Beals, right?
Right.
Because I know what each of their strengths are, and I also know what sort of person they want to work with,
And
right?
that's
And
the
what sort of
important
person would appreciate them.
and that's the important part that when somebody comes along and says, "How come such and such?" you can answer that and you can do it in a way that helps them understand where they can truly fit into what you're offering
Right.
and that you can
Right.
find a way to make it work. And that's really important. I've always maintained the best salespeople are teachers, pure and simple, in almost everything
And
that they
preachers.
do, and preachers, but listening preachers. So it
Right.
is important
Well,
to yeah.
Well, and I bring this up in the context because we have a Bible college here in our town. So when I was a manager for Cutco, right, we get the college kids, right, some of these seminary students, looking for summer work, and
Right.
they're like, how does sales relate to being in the ministry later? I said, man, I said, are you kidding?
You
I
kidding?
said, it's the purest. I said, you've got the hardest sales job in the world. You ask people to pay the price now, and the payoff is at the end of their life. I said, if that's not sales, I don't know what is. At least when people give me money, I give them something for it within a couple of days. I said, you better be good at sales if you're going to be a preacher eventually,
Yeah.
because the payment, the cost comes now, and the payoff, the reward comes later. I said, man, those are the same. But teachers the same way, right? You've got
Yeah.
to invest the kids or the student, no matter how old, in what they're learning and why it's going to be relevant down the road.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you clearly have accepted all of this. When did you realize that maybe you were doing it wrong and that you reevaluated what you do?
That's a great story. And there was a light bulb moment for me, right? I think the kids these days call it the origin story, right? And to tell the story correctly, I'm going to have to give labels to the other two people involved because their names are so similar that when I tell the story, I managed to confuse myself who was who.
Huh.
So I was in St. Louis, Missouri, which for reasons I won't go into for this podcast is a weird town to be involved in B2B business in. They literally would prefer to do business with somebody they went to high school with. It's just it's strange but true. And I can go into the background of why it's true. It just is. It's accepted by people that have sold in towns other than St. Louis. They know that St. Louis is weird. Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm having trouble not getting the traction I want. Who's in my industry, he agrees that we're going to partner and we're going to have a revenue share. I don't believe in finder's fees, but if you're going to co-create the value with me, that's a different thing altogether, right? Writing a name on a piece of paper, I'm not paying for that. But if you're going to go with me on the appointment and help me get the job done, yeah,
then you
co-create the value. Okay, back to the point. So my wingman, right, my partner, I'll call him wingman for the version of this story, local, been around forever. Prospect, business owner, right? We've got a B2B offer that's going to be fairly lucrative because he's part of a family that owns a family of businesses, quite a large there in St. Louis. And we had met with the CFO because that was the real touch point on the business as far as the value proposition over lunch. The four of us have been there, prospect, wingman, CFO of the prospect, and myself. And it went reasonably well. They wanted to follow up to make the decision, which is not atypical. So we're back there standing in the parking lot of the prospect's business. And the prospect points at me and says, "Who is this guy?" And my partner says, "He's my guy." And the prospect points at me and goes, "But I don't know this guy." And my partner says, "But I know this guy." And the prospect points at me and says, "Well, what happens if something happens to this guy?" And my partner says, "I'll find another guy." And that was the purest, simplest form of what's truly happening when you're building a network. See, my days at Cutco were predicated on some of the same things. I go to Michael's house, I ask for the name of your neighbors, your best friends, your pastor, your doctor, whoever you think, and then I would call them, hey, your buddy Michael Hinkson said you'd help me out. So I'm borrowing a little bit of credibility,
Right.
but the sale was made in the product, right? I was
Right.
only asking for a moment of your time, but I expected to show up, meaning I was only borrowing someone else's credibility to get a moment of your time, but I expected to show up and let the product and my sterling personality, as I like to think of it, shine through and make the sale.
There you go.
And I realized, because when the prospect pointed me and said, who is this guy? I thought my partner would say, he's my guy. Daniel, here's your chance to rise and shine. Bring it. Do that song and dance that you do. Right. And he didn't. He kept the focus on the real point, which was that the prospect had credibility with my partner and my partner had credibility with me.
Yeah.
Right. And in that moment where he refused to put the spotlight on me, my partner kept it on himself. And he said, Mr. Prospect, don't worry about him. I'm not asking you to trust him. I'm asking you to trust me. And that was the light bulb where I said, oh, what we're building is not introductions. We're building endorsements.
Mm-hmm.
When I get to the prospect's door, I have all the credibility that came from Bert, who referred me. Right. Whatever credibility my partner Bert had with the prospect Butch, I show up on Butch's doorstep with that credibility. And when Butch starts to question it, the prospect starts to question it, my partner goes, what are you questioning? You're going to question him? We're not talking about him. We're talking about you and me. And we've known each other 30 years. What are you doing here? And I'm like, oh, that's why we're doing this. That's the point. I'm not asking to borrow your Rolodex. I'm asking to borrow your credibility.
And the other part of that question that comes to mind is, did the credibility that Bert and Butch have with each other ever get to the point where it transferred to you, at least in part?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, we got the sale. Yeah, I mean, that was the conversation where he's like, all right, we're going to do this. I'm like, yeah, because it was a big deal. It was a very large deal. And yeah,
but in general, you know, I hear what you're saying, and in general, somewhere along the line, the prospect has to hopefully recognize this other guy really is part of the process and adds value, and so I'm going to like him too.
Correct, and you can drop the ball. It's possible to screw it up. But I'm starting at a level 10 in the case of this particular pair of people, and it's mine to lose, as opposed to starting from 0 and trying to get up to 5 or 6 or 8 or whatever it takes to make the sale. And that's the biggest difference, right? It will transfer to me, but then it's up to me to drop the ball and lose it. Meaning, if I don't do anything stupid, it's going to stay there. And you know what was great about my partner was he didn't even, not that I would have, but he didn't give me any room to say anything stupid. He's like, let's not even put the spotlight on Daniel. Let's keep the spotlight on the two of us and the fact that I've never let you down in 30 years. Why would you think this is going to be a bad introduction now?
Right. One of the questions that I keep thinking about, and I've thought about it a fair amount here. People are interesting. What can I say? So many people always say that they believe and absolutely support the idea of quality over quantity, but when it really comes down to it, they don't pay attention to that.
Yeah, and here's why I think that's true. Their notion of quality over quantity refers to the people that they meet, not the relationships that they establish, meaning they think the quality is found out there. And the reality is, if you know how to build a relationship, then you can choose to build it with the right people. And that's your quality over quantity. I can absolutely make people's heads explode when I sit down with a pen and paper and a calculator and can prove to them all the clients that they ever need from now until the end of their career, all the ideal clients, most highly profitable clients that they need from now until the end of their career, is accessible to them right now, today, inside the next 12 hours, is accessible to them through the current network that they have.
Yeah.
And the reason that breaks down is because people are primarily visual. Those of us with ADHD even more so, but we only see the people that we see, and we forget that everybody that we know and loves us and trusts us and would make a recommendation for us has their own world of people that trust them and their own world of people that trust them.
Right.
And we lose, but that's literally the definition of network. A network is not your first degree. That's first degree. That's not a network. Those are your friends and connections.
Yeah.
Your network is the people that trust you and the people that trust them and the people that trust them. And when you sit down and do the math, everybody you need is out there. So the key is not, the quality is not found in meeting more people and sifting for quality. The quality is found in knowing how to build the relationship, selecting the people that could be quality in your world, and then building with them, meaning quit looking for the unicorn, be the unicorn.
Right.
And that's where people miss it. They still think that the externality of a quality connection is somewhere outside of them, and it's not. It's internal to their skill set. If they don't have it, they can learn it from me. And it's internal to the network that they already have that already exists.
And let's go into that briefly, if we could learn from you. What do you do today, and how can people take advantage of that, as it were?
I primarily serve.
We had to get there, you know.
Yeah, I know. Well, and I only say that because I love bringing content, right? I mean, my best, sales pitch is,
I understand.
There's more where that came from, right? That's how I tend to wrap things up. If you think there's any value in anything I said over the last, 60 minutes, there's more where that came from. But I will say this: I primarily serve three sorts of people: people that don't have the time to build a network, people that don't want to, they would want to focus on other parts of their job, or people that enjoy it and do it, but they have not figured out how to make it consistently profitable to them.
Got it.
The output of working with me on either short or long-term basis is to produce 72 to 120, and yes, those are specific numbers for a reason, 72 to 120 warm introductions to ideal prospects per year. 72 to 120 warm introductions to ideal prospects year in and year out. And I tend to have higher value, meaning my price makes sense for people who have a higher ticket or where trust is a higher factor.
Right.
I could teach skills to somebody in direct sales or network marketing. They're never going to earn enough money off what I teach them to make my price make sense. But if they're in real estate where a transaction is worth thousands of dollars, or financial services where a transaction is, lifetime value of that client could be tens of thousands in commissions and revenues, or a B2B sale where the commissions and revenues could be in the tens or hundreds or millions, then my number makes a lot more sense.
Right.
But I can show people over a 90-day period how to build a network of fewer, not more, fewer, and produce 72 to 120 warm introductions to ideal prospects on less than 5 hours a month.
There you go. So if people want to reach out to you and explore all of this, how do they do that?
803-361-6825. I am very comfortable giving out my phone number. If you want to text me, you can. Just say Michael Hingson's podcast, and I'll know where you came from. 803-361-6825. For those of you that are afraid of actually speaking to me or getting into a conversation before you research me, the irony is that my full name is the name of a bombastic Australian parliamentarian. So you cannot Google search me and find me. I'm buried under a couple million search returns that are not me. But I did buy my full name as my URL. I have a website that is my full name: Daniel Patrick Andrews.com. The way Daniel is normally spelled, the way Patrick is normally spelled, the way Andrews with an S on the end is normally spelled, DanielPatrickAndrews.com, or my phone number, 803-361-6825.
And I hope people will reach out. We need more and better good salespeople, and more and better people who understand a lot about building relationships. Well, we could spend a lot of time talking about that with politicians, but we won't go there. That's another whole story.
They're not, and the short version there is the skills, and it's been proven in Western democracies, the skills and the personality traits that are required to successfully get elected are the antithesis of the skills and personality traits required to govern effectively. We've reached a point where we cannot elect somebody capable of doing the job because people capable of doing the job can't get elected, and people can get elected aren't capable of doing the job. So it's its own tragedy.
My only addition to that would be, or who don't want to stoop to what you have to do to get elected. So they either can't or know that they just don't want to step down that road.
The skills are actually not. It's not like sales and management where it's unlikely to have both, but you can find a person that's got both. They've literally found that they're the opposite, meaning you cannot find a candidate who's got the personality to get elected that also has the personality to govern, meaning they literally don't exist in the same person.
Yeah.
That's the frustrating part. It's not that we're looking for the unicorn. They don't exist. They are diametrically opposed. And that's so tragic. That's tragic for us at this point.
So one last time, phone number and web address. And
Daniel Patrick Andrews.com. Phone number 803-361-6825. I haven't changed it in 25 years. I'm not going to change it for the next 25. 803-361-6825.
Well, Daniel, I want to thank you for being here. This has been really fun. I always love to talk to people about sales and with people about sales, because it's nice to find people who have kind of like-minded attitudes about that sort of stuff. So I want to thank you for being here. And I want to thank all of you for listening and watching and whatever. We really appreciate your time. We value it. I hope that this has been helpful and interesting and useful for you. Love to hear your comments. Please feel free to email me, michaelhi@accessibe.com. That's michaelhi @accessibe.com. Or go to our podcast page, which is www.michaelhingson.com/podcast. Michael Hingson is michaelhingson.com/podcast. But wherever you are doing the podcast with us today and enjoying this episode, I hope, please give us a 5-star rating. We value your ratings. We value your input. We value anything that you want to tell us. If you know of a guest, and Daniel, you as well, if you know of people who ought to be a guest anyway on Unstoppable Mindset and who you think would carry on a great conversation with us, love to meet them. Always looking to meet people. I would really appreciate that. And I appreciate that from all of you listening. So with that, I want to thank you, Daniel, one last time for being here. This has been a whole lot of fun.
It was fun for me too. Thank you, Michael.